Hi everyone, and welcome to our first debate of Easter term. This House believes reform are the real opposition. Just to quickly run you through the structure of this debate, we're going to begin with a proposition speech, then an opposition speech, and then a round of floor speeches from the audience, which are short 2 to 3 minute speeches that we'd like you to participate in. Then we'll have another proposition, and then opposition speech, then another round of floor speeches, and then proposition, and then opposition. Just as a couple of reminders, no filming, please, during the debates. And also, you're very welcome to offer point of information or interventions when people are speaking. But please remember, there is a prerogative of the speakers whether or not to accept that. To begin, our first speaker in proposition of the motion, this House believes reform are the real opposition, is Josephine Ellis. Josephine is a first-year undergraduate student reading Human, Social and Political Sciences at Sydney Sussex College. Josephine, you have the ears of the House.
In the last 2 years, I voted in 4 elections. Started off Labour for local mayor, then Labour for London mayor, a protest vote for Green in the national elections, and finally Lib Dem for my local councillors. That is to say, I do not come here from the same position. I do not stand here like my colleagues with the hope for Reform UK's future, or the Conservatives for that matter. But there's an elephant in the room, and I think we should talk about it. Reform, no doubt, has had an extraordinary ascent. Yes, it's been lifted on a tide of global populism. But how has it become something so much greater than the sum of its 4 parliamentary parts? If, as I will argue, reform is the product of disproportionate media attention and blind panic from major political parties, how have we got here, considering in all seriousness that the idea that reform is the real opposition to the government? Because what does it mean to be the real opposition? It doesn't mean the party with the second best policies or most experience. Whatever the polls say, the real opposition is the party the media fixates on, traditional and social, fixates on, and most importantly, the party perceived as the greatest threat to the government. Nigel Farage so much as sneezes and commands the full attention of the British press. But why did 20 journalists line up to hand him a tissue? He's a compelling orator, sure, and in a time of so much uncertainty, his one-step solutions do have their appeal. But why does Reform poll in their 20s, where UKIP, the Brexit Party and other Farage projects have failed? Why did Clacton elect him when 7 other constituencies had previously turned him away? I think we should start with our willing tabloids. There is no denying that parties have a transactional relationship with the media, give views and take coverage, create outrage and be rewarded with attention. However, minor parties have so often clamoured around the edges of headlines, some so desperate that they'll flip over a paddleboard just to be heard. Lacking governing experience, minor party policy and its conduct is scrutinised to a far lesser extent. With the no need to implement their manifestos, historically, minor parties are used to giving the public a sense of their general direction. So the specifics, the facts, the numbers, they all seep into the shadows. But Reform's policies are no doubt controversial, and they no doubt cause uproar. They offer traditional media, whose viewership declines year on year, the chance to call it breaking news and command much-needed eyes in the attention economy. So we have Reform, not scrutinised, but amplified. Thanks to 14 years of austerity and the accompanying unforgiving spotlight, His Majesty's current opposition is not afforded the same luxury. If the Conservative Party's position on climate change was nothing can stop the power of the sun, or their response to a candidate's sexual abuse conviction, as per Richard Tice, is that we are a Christian country who need to forgive, the media would hang them out to dry. Reform, on the other hand, are immune to the political ramifications of scandal. For a while, they were just a couple of guys with microphones able to generate clicks. So he kept giving them attention until the far-removed possibility of a Reform opposition suddenly became real. So, the 2024 election, and Reform makes up 10% of traditional media coverage, triple what the other so-called minor parties got together. However, whilst the Conservatives did get more traditional media coverage, Reform's online presence tells a different story. Their political playbook almost exclusively originates from the most polarising political debates and the angriest tweets. Immigration, fear-mongering, the culture war, net zero hating. Reform's main agenda is found in online echo chambers originally. Harking back to his Vote Leave days, Nigel Farage knew how to harness the power of Facebook. call it ingenious, or capitalising on Elon Musk's Twitter overhaul, Reform's online dominance was just the beginning. The principles of Reform UK existed on the fringe of British politics for years, occasionally poking its nose in the way of UKIP or the Brexit Party, but being firmly battered away by the power of first past the post. They could not transform into the real opposition trapped in a social media vacuum debating about pronouns. It was only when the major parties panicked and they began to treat Reform as a legitimate alternative to the status quo that they brought Reform's ideas right into the mainstream. And it wasn't long before Labour followed. So they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. We'll leave the ECHR, says Badenoch. No, we'll cut foreign aid, retorts Keir Starmer. The rightward slide continues. But Reform are not shackled by the experiences of government. The Constitution and conventions do not matter, and the feasibility of their manifesto or contract is tomorrow's problem. So they can always push politics just that little bit further right than the Labour or the Conservatives know is practical. But that hasn't stopped them from trying. Now, we demonise migrants, obsessed with the small boats, which make up less than 4% of immigration statistics. We endorse the kind of rhetoric that blames ethnic minorities for social housing queues, when 77.6% of tenants are white British families. So what next? The Conservatives will keep blaming Reform for their humiliating defeat, and they ignore how they hemorrhage votes to the Lib Dems. Labour is so afraid of losing their hard-fought red wall that the Greens and Independents are sweeping in cities, as today will probably prove no less. In the battle for those 90 seats where Reform came second, Labour is willing to don Reform's colours in Facebook campaigns. But for every Reform-leading Labour voter who could have approved of the aforementioned foreign aid cuts, 10 more Green or Lib Dem voters like myself were repulsed. My maternal granddad, a Labour voter of over 50 years, who made me fall in love with politics, resigned his party membership in protest. So, although Reform is not yet the official opposition, if you only got your politics from Labour's messaging, you might as well think they were. And then let's just look at the other side of the House. It's clear. The Tories can sense the visceral emotion at the crux of Reform's popularity, and they seem to think that coming just short of them, policy for policy, will allow them to capitalise on it too. However, I think this strategy is doomed to fail. So much of the public fury is directed at the Conservatives themselves. As most of us should know, after feeling Brexit and then COVID and then cost of living, all before we turned 18, and then don't get me started on tuition fees. But the students aren't the only angry ones. Take my grandpa who's in the audience tonight. The Conservative Party will never win him back. He taught me how to love debating. He taught me how to challenge myself. And he showed up again and again for the politics of Thatcher, Cameron and May. Now he's drifting uneasily from a Lib Dem vote, closer to Reform, asking me at my last family dinner if I'd give Farage a chance. In fact, in the face of a disappointing local election prediction, we're already seeing calls for another leadership challenge, swinging from centre-right to so far right you're almost left again, see Reform's stance on nationalisation. Go for it.
Isn't it rather the case that Reform is making the Tories move towards what you regard, as you say, as far-right policies, far-right rhetoric, but actually representing what a significant portion of the electorate wants, which is a stronger policy on immigration, which is more restrictive immigration policy. We may not like these policies, but these are what people wanted, and that's why a lot of people are angry at the Tories, is for not representing those policies, and now they're moving towards the centre on that ground to represent more people.
I do not think the Conservatives are moving towards the centre. As I'll get to later when I talk to you about Tom Tugendhat, it is very easy to be tempted by Reform's ideas. They are convincing and compelling, and Reform's popularity is not going to encourage a sudden change in opinion. Reform's popularity is only pushing the Conservatives closer to them, and Labour... I didn't accept, sorry. Let's take Tom Tugendhat then. I believe in my heart he didn't really want to leave the ECHR. But his leadership campaigns does show how easy the temptations of Reform can be. He had a real opportunity to reclaim the centre. I use this example because I think his inner turmoil is a microcosm for what's happening in your party. You aren't even really mimicking Reform universally. In front of me are two very lovely, well-established One Nation Conservatives. But your party can't seem to decide just how close you want to get to Reform. Do you blame the economic catastrophe of Brexit on red tape and the nanny state, or do you move forward to better trading relations with our biggest partner? Do you step up to face the existential challenge of my generation, or do you frack our way to a climate death? At the moment, who's to say? As bizarre as Reform's policies seem to me, at least they can all agree on what they think. A real opposition needs to learn how to band together instead of briefing against each other in the Telegraph. If we have learned anything from the 14 years of Labour opposition, it's that infighting is an election-losing strategy. What it takes to be a real opposition is to know what you're opposing. Kemi Badenoch, or whoever takes this party to their next chapter, should by no means take cues from reform. The solution to the official opposition recapturing the public's imagination is not to stoop to this level. And reform also has Labour to thank for their meteoric rise. Ironically, Labour's misguided attempts to stop Farage have only brought him closer to power. Fundamentally, reform is the real opposition because Labour and Conservatives have paved the way for them. They've been playing right into reform's hands, and the media is making sure we all know about it. We have brought reform to the front and centre. We're literally doing this right now by having this debate, and therefore, we have placed them at the heart of opposition, so much as you may not want to admit it. Friend or foe, I think we are forced to propose. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first speaker in opposition of the motion is Madeline Matthews. Madeline is a second-year undergraduate student reading philosophy at Jesus College and the union's current equalities officer. Madeline, you have the ears of the House.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here. It's fabulous to see the chamber so very full. And tonight I'm going to be arguing in opposition to the motion. This is because, despite the media hype surrounding reform's rise, there's a fundamental confusion about what constitutes true opposition. Therefore, the real opposition is in fact the incumbent opposition, the Conservative Party. Reform cannot be considered the real opposition because they lack three essential qualities. First, the institutional apparatus necessary for thorough government scrutiny. Second, the historical staying power demonstrated by successful opposition forces. And third, the parliamentary presence required to present a credible alternative government. I'll examine each of these three critical deficiencies in turn. So first, let us turn to the institutional deficiencies of reform. And this is best shown through comparison with, again, the Conservative Party. So only one of Reform's 4 MPs has previously served as a Member of Parliament. In contrast, 79% of Conservative MPs elected in the 2024 general election had previously served as MPs. And further to this, none of Reform's 4 MPs have ever held ministerial positions, which is obviously not the case for the Tories. Looking at their front bench alone, we can see many former ministers. Think Kemi Badenoch, Priti Patel, and Alex Burghardt. And this experience gap extends to other areas. There aren't any Reform MPs on any select committee, for example. And this lack of experience makes it difficult for Reform to have the practical knowledge to enable them to thoroughly scrutinise the government. Next, let's look at research and policy development. The Conservative Research Department, founded in 1929, helps develop policies for the Tories, and they also have extensive external policy networks, including relationships with specialised think tanks, such as the Adam Smith Institute and the Policy Exchange, and prominent academics, such as Niall Ferguson. Furthermore, the Conservatives have a well-built membership infrastructure, including the Conservative Women's Organisation, the Young Conservatives, and university societies, including our very own KUKA. They also operate many local constituency associations nationwide. These provide recruitment pipelines and campaign bases from within communities. And in contrast, Reform lacks permanent offices in most constituencies, instead relying on ad hoc campaign operations, and their membership structure is not so developed as the Tories. Now, let us move on to historical staying power. So Reform lacks the historical staying power which they would require in order to constitute a formidable opposition. And multiple insurgent parties throughout the history of British politics have faced this same issue. First, let us look at the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. Their trajectory offers a direct historical parallel. In 1981, 4 MPs left Labour to form a new party, the SDP. They were dubbed the Gang of Four and spoke about breaking the mould at various press conferences, leading to initial media excitement, which is echoed nowadays in the press's coverage of Reform. At their peak, the SDP, in alliance with the Liberals, had an opinion poll rating of 50%. However, by 1990, the party had failed, so had to fully merge with the Liberals to form the Lib Dems. The centuries-old mould of British politics was not to be broken this time. Another example is when Reform's very own Nigel Farage attempted to break this mould. His former party, UKIP, triumphed in the 2014 European Parliament election, winning the most votes and seats of any party. This led to headlines about political earthquakes, again an example of this initial media furore. Yet across their existence, only one MP ever won a seat for UKIP in a general election, and their support collapsed post-Brexit. demonstrating the vulnerability of single-issue momentum. Reform, with their narrow policy focus on immigration and sovereignty, also lacks the wide-ranging appeal required for longevity. No thanks. Similar to these previous parties, Reform benefits from disproportionate media coverage. As we've seen, this momentum has historically proved an unreliable indicator. This is especially true of social media, where many young people seem intrigued by Reform. However, many of those young people are not yet eligible to vote, and even those who are eligible are unlikely, given historical data on young adult turnout. Despite this, Reform continues to heavily depend on Farage's personal brand rather than a sustainable party structure. He has a show on GB News, as well as 1.2 million TikTok followers, which is more than any other figure in British politics, or so raved the FT yesterday. However, this is doomed to fail. The Trades Union Congress chief has called Farage a political fraud cosplaying as a working-class champion. His previous projects, such as UKIP and the Brexit Party, demonstrate this pattern of initial success followed by a decline. Moreover, a personal brand alone is insufficient to sustain electoral success. Unlike Donald Trump over in the US, whom you may have heard of, who successfully leveraged his celebrity status within an established party infrastructure, Farage faces this additional challenge of building Reform from scratch while operating in a parliamentary system which, as we've seen, historically resists new parties. Trump's success came partly from working within the Republican Party's existing framework, something which Farage has never even attempted to do with established British parties. Now let us move on to my third point, parliamentary presence. So Reform also lacks the parliamentary presence which they would need to constitute a real opposition. So first, this might use rather a literal point, but His Majesty's most loyal opposition is defined by the Commons as the party with the second largest number of seats. And this formal position isn't just a kind of nominal, it also comes with certain rights under parliamentary procedure. For example, the opposition has the right to set business on 17 days in each parliamentary session, and they have precedence in asking questions to ministers and speaking at debates. Therefore, on this literal level, Reform simply is not the real opposition. No thanks. Moreover, it's unlikely they will achieve the requisite parliamentary presence to be considered the real opposition within the near future. The first-past-the-post system, as I'm sure you'll all know, structurally favours established parties with concentrated support. Reform's voter base is too geographically diffuse to translate votes into seats. Even with a 14.8% share of the popular vote in 2024, their parliamentary presence was minimal at only 0.8%. Reform thus effectively splits the right-wing vote rather than replacing the Conservative opposition. We can thank them for how badly the Tories won the last general election, at least in part. And the Conservatives remain better financially resourced, with more established donor networks. They're nowadays considered the party of London-based entrepreneurs, and their donor pool reflects this. Their main competitors for this are Labour, ever since Labour have become much more business-friendly under Starmer. This doesn't leave much room for Reform, who rely on only a handful of individuals to support them. So, I've done this quite quickly, but in conclusion, Reform represents a protest movement rather than a genuine opposition force. The Conservative Party, despite its electoral setback in 2024, remains the most credible opposition. They have institutional knowledge, which facilitates their scrutiny of government, Labour at the moment, the historical resilience to actually last, and the parliamentary presence to actually pose an opposition to the government in the kind of substantive sense that it's often meant. Therefore, furthermore, Reform's fundamental identity as anti-establishment, as outsiders, contradicts the role required of the opposition. While they may serve as a catalyst for change in the Conservative Party due to the superficial popularity of their policies, this merely makes Reform an opposition to the actual opposition. As the first speaker for the proposition mentioned, there are a lot of policies that the Tories are using nowadays have moved further towards Reform. This is not because Reform are suddenly this kind of party that's going to stand the test of time and present an actual opposition to the government. It's just because they're showing, it's just because they're showing what the people want, and so people are moving towards that in order to garner more votes. The weight of historical evidence and current reality, therefore, clearly demonstrates that Reform is not and cannot be the real opposition in British politics. And with that, I strongly urge you to vote in opposition to the motion tonight. Reform is not the real opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madeline. We're going to move to a round of floor speeches from the audience. Would anyone like to give a short 2 to 3 minute speech, or shorter, in favour of the motion, "This House believes Reform are the real opposition"? Yes, over there. Name and college, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Jake, I'm from Emmanuel College, And I don't have that much to say, just because I think the first proposition speech was very good. But I think the simple point to be said here is the Reform Party has a narrative. They have a story that they're telling the British public. Now, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the opinion of most of the people in this room, it's a pretty detestable narrative of kind of reheated Trumpism. But it's a narrative nonetheless, and it's a narrative that speaks to a lot of people. What narrative are the Conservative Party selling to the British public? Kemi Badenoch doesn't really have any policies other than sort of vague murmurings about transgender bathrooms. And so, if you are a right-wing voter in the UK today and you have a local election coming up or whatever, you have no reason to vote for the Conservatives other than maybe like a vague tribal loyalty to them or just as a tactical vote. There's no essence to them that would make you want to vote for them. And so in that respect, Reform are already the opposition, simply because they are in command of the right-wing narrative of British politics. The Tories are completely inert. And there's only one more thing I want to say, which is that the first speaker for the opposition said that it's because of the first-past-the-post system and the structure of British politics, it's really hard for third parties to get in power. Sure, like the SDP failed or whatever, but anyone here who's ever studied British political history in like the 19th century will know that in that period, the British two-party system was between the Conservatives and the Liberals. But in the early 20th century, the Labour Party overtook the Liberals as the main left-wing party because they had a stronger narrative that better appealed to the issues of the day and the issues that people cared about. And so the Liberals fell by the wayside and became a sort of slightly irrelevant third party, as I would say they continue to be, I'm afraid. And so, with all that in mind, it's not even a hypothetical thing about the future. Reform are already the main opposition, I would say. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, for whoever gives the best floor speech of the night, we also have a floor speech prize, which is a customizable hoodie from Ryder and Amy's, if that encourages you to give a floor speech tonight. Is anyone interested in giving a floor speech in opposition of the motion? Yes, over there. Name and college, please.
Even better. So, Munir Hassan, St. Catherine's. For Reform to be a legitimate opposition party, it would require the experience of actually seeing how Parliament works. It's not just rhetoric, but to be able to deliver policy. It is quite good to see a familiar face from the Conservative Party that is part of Reform, but for it to be a plausible opposition, that's what it needs to move towards, is to actually have experience of how Parliament works and to bring that experience forward to be able to enact any policies that they want to continue. And that's what I'm afraid of, that Reform don't have that experience as yet. And for them to be in opposition, that's something that they will have to deliver on. And thinking about experience from previous time with government, it was when there was a coalition between the DUP and the Conservative Party in order for certain views to be put forward. Perhaps that might be a way for Reform to have the ability to move forward. It's my position that Reform are not quite there yet, but it might end up being there in the future.
And is anyone interested in giving a floor speech in abstention of the motion? You're abstaining. Yes, name and college over there, please.
Adam Herman, Downing College. First of all, I'm going to make my mother very happy by making a quick point. University fees are not the Tories' fault. Had Tony Blair not encouraged 50% of people to go to university to get duff degrees, we would not be in the situation where we have people paying with stupid amounts of money to go to university. Most of them do not have a bearing on people's lives, and most people don't use them. Everyone is obsessed with university culture. It's ridiculous. Right. Reform are a response to people's anger. Their policies are talking points, they lack substance, and they only pose to embolden the downtrodden. They are merely the voice of people who feel like they are underrepresented in a party and a system that doesn't represent them. For now, they are a very loud dissenting voice that's making everybody squirm, but they're a disorganised mess and don't possess the unity that the proposition claims. Human memory is short, and after every major political party wipeout, it was only a few years of government before people went back to hating whoever was currently in government, because whoever is currently operating is the one most easy to blame for everything that's going wrong. Reform are an opposition, so to speak, but not a real one, because the grass is always greener.
Thank you. We're going to now move back to our paper speakers. Our second speaker in proposition of the motion is Marco Longhi. He was a Conservative MP for Dudley North from 2019 to 2024, following on from 20 years in local government. He served in the government as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Brazil, for which he was awarded the highest order of merit given to non-Brazilian nationals. Formerly a Conservative, Marco recently joined Reform UK. You have the ears of the House.
Madam President, members of the House, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very real honour for me to be here tonight at the Cambridge Union, a place where ideas are sharpened, wit is weaponised, and occasionally reputations are ruined. I shall do my best, of course, to avoid the latter. The motion before us is simple, that this House believes reform is the real opposition. Obviously, I stand firmly in agreement. And not just because it is fashionable these days to be part of a revolution, but because the facts, the logic, and, dare I say, common sense all point that way. Let us spend a moment on what an opposition is. An opposition is not measured by the number of MPs who sit opposite the government and shout "resign" louder than each other. An opposition is a body that offers a genuine alternative, a different vision of governance, a challenge to the status quo. An opposition must oppose, not mimic, not hedge, and not offer a watered-down version of the same failures. It should stand for something different. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, reform is doing that job better than anyone else. Let me evidence why reform is the real opposition by focusing on 3 points. I shall not focus, obviously, on the semantics around the number of MPs. That is an obvious statement of fact. First, the evidence from the polls. Secondly, the way reform is setting the national conversation. And thirdly, the simple fact of authenticity, something Westminster is absolutely devoid of. So my first point is evidence from the polls. Poll after poll now shows reform ahead in the polls, with the Conservatives running not second, but third. In reform, we are talking about a political party born not from the establishment, but from frustration. Frustration with endless broken promises and an elite political class more obsessed with managing decline than delivering change. Reform, ladies and gentlemen, speaks to the millions who feel that these so-called mainstream parties are two sides of the same battered coin, but undistinguishable in their faded and tired similarity. And if you doubt that, listen to how often Labour and Conservatives sound suspiciously similar, something that I have personally heard many hundreds of times on Dudley's doorsteps. You are both the same. They argue over how much immigration should rise by, not whether it should be reversed, stopped, or controlled. They argue over how fast net zero should be achieved, not whether the targets are even remotely sensible. Some say Miliband is mad, but I remember Theresa May putting those targets into law. Meanwhile, Reform is standing up and saying, no, let's actually debate this. Let's not accept decline as inevitable. That is what a real opposition does. My second point around setting the national conversation, and has been touched upon previously, is media attention. Some say, and they have tonight, well, the media gives reform too much attention. I say to that, isn't that exactly what happens when a movement becomes too powerful to ignore? It's not because reform is some curious sideshow. It's because millions and millions of people recognize themselves in the issues reform champions: immigration, energy independence, freedom of speech, national pride. When did the last official opposition, sorry Sakir, lead the headlines for standing up for anything controversial in defence of British values? Labour seems to be treating the next election like an episode of the Great British Bake Off. Don't offend anyone, serve a soggy policy, and hope no one notices. Reform, on the other hand, is the equivalent of walking into the kitchen, throwing the Victoria sponge out of the window and saying, right, who's hungry for something real? My third point, authenticity. Authenticity is the new political currency. People aren't looking for polished Blairiman sound bites anymore. They can get that from AI. But let's be honest, at least AI is intelligent, not just artificial. Reform doesn't pretend. It doesn't shapeshift to please BBC Question Time audiences. It says what it believes, even if it makes the Guardian editorial team faint in the process.
Point of information.
Yes.
You can't expect us to actually believe that the neoliberal demagogues that are your leaders are authentic in their care about working class people.
I would just say, go and have a pint with Lee Anderson. And no. That's only because you want a pint, right? And this matters, ladies and gentlemen, because opposition without courage is just performance art. So as I start concluding my defense of this motion, let me also provide a historical reminder. The Labour Party itself was born from the trade unions. It didn't start off as the biggest opposition. It became the opposition because it spoke for a constituency of people that the traditional parties had abandoned. Reform today is doing exactly that. It is not the official opposition by a majority of MPs, but in message, in spirit, in support, it is already the official opposition. Lastly, a word on the Conservatives. I say this with some love, sadness, and even some anger. They're my ex of many decades, after all. But when a party that was once the natural home for small C Conservatives starts sounding like the Green Party with better suits, you know something has gone wrong. The Conservatives spent 14 years morphing into Blair's New Labour. Now they stand there, bewildered, wondering how to oppose the very thing they spent years becoming. Today's official opposition is like watching a man punch a mirror and blaming the reflection. When I defected to Reform, I said that the Conservative Party had left me. I hadn't left the Conservative Party. Today, it is a party that has lost its soul. At this point, the only thing they're conserving is confusion. What they are conserving, perhaps, are the traditions of U-turns, broken promises, and new leaders every 5 minutes. Meanwhile, Reform is capturing the energy, the frustration, and the hope, ladies and gentlemen, the hope of those who believe Britain can be bold, free, and proud. In conclusion, when you measure an opposition not by the number of seats it holds, but by the strength of its challenge, the clarity of its message, the people it inspires, and the pressures it places on the old order, then there is no doubt. Reform is the real opposition, and if you want real change, you need a real opposition, and that's why reform is here. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second speaker in opposition of the motion is the Right Honourable Sir Robert Buckland. Sir Robert was the Conservative MP for Swindon South from 2010 to 2024. He previously served as Solicitor General, Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. He was knighted in 2022 for his political and public service and was recently appointed Wales's Third Church Estates Commissioner. So Robert, you have the ears of the House. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam President. It's tempting in this debate to resort to semantics about what an opposition is. Is it Her Majesty's official opposition, which clearly the Conservative Party in terms of numbers and organisation is, or is it the full-throated, media-backed opposition that the proponents of this motion would have you believe? Our first speaker, in a very well-constructed but a rather cynical speech, I thought, suggested that opposition is who the media choose it to be. Well, I take a very old-fashioned view of that, Madam President. I think governments and oppositions are chosen by the people. And the people are never wrong. I had to face the decision of the electorate last year in rather full view on that July night, and I hope you realised and saw that I took my defeat gracefully. That's because the British public are never wrong, and they have to be listened to when they tell parties that they no longer want them in government. But listening to people and responding to their genuine fears and concerns is very, very different from latching on to putting your lasso around a particular fad or cause, which is what I believe the current reform movement is, or should I call it the Faragiste movement. It's a very interesting, isn't it, that the charismatic Nigel Farage, who personally I get on with very well, has such a French surname. His politics is really quite continental, isn't it? It's much more of the Poujadiste, Boulangiste version of politics that we're just not used to in this country. I think if he had his chance, he'd be out on the streets of London, and if they were cobblestoned, he'd have those cobblestones up. And yes, those yellow-vested gilets jaunes would be with him protesting against the ignominies of this appalling Labour government. It's all very, very un-British, I think. And therefore we should really pause and just think about what it is that we are unleashing upon British politics. Because when you look at reform, and look at them carefully, as I'm sure you're doing, it really is Nigel Farage, isn't it? You know, once you strip that away, what are you left with? You're left with a party or a movement, I'm not sure they're a party yet, but there's certainly a movement that can tell you all the problems with this country, but can come up with none of the solutions. They're like the doctor who tells you that you've got a very serious infection, but gives you absolutely no prescription whatsoever. Yes? You echoed Disraeli, who said that the job of opposition is to oppose everything, to propose nothing, and to bring down the government. He said that in the 1860s. Now, much as I'm a huge admirer of Benjamin Disraeli and his particular brand of Toryism, which still lives to this day, I do not think that opposition in the 2020s can just be that. It has to be more. And when you strip away the noise, the sturm und drang about political commentators and what they're saying and who's up and who's down, which frankly now I'm out of Westminster is of marginal interest to me, let's actually go back to what people are worried about. There are three great challenges, I think, facing all of us as citizens, as members of this society. First of all, the challenge of peace and security. The old order that was set up at the end of the Second World War in 1945 by the great figures of that time is over. NATO and its structures are now being challenged in a way that we couldn't have imagined even a few months ago. Now, we shouldn't be too surprised, because some of these tendencies have been developing for a number of years, but there's no doubt that the new administration in Washington has accelerated that. So that's number one. Number two is the alarming for many and breathtaking for some of us rise of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, which is not just going to be a bolt-on to the way we live our lives, but is going to fundamentally change our relationships with each other and indeed with wider society. It's frightening a lot of people out there who are thinking about what they're going to be doing in a few years, whether they're going to have work, whether they're going to be able to afford to feed their families. And finally, there is, whether they like it or not, the real challenge of what climate change means to mass population movements, strife in the sub-Saharan part of Africa, and the pressure that we see here manifested in Europe. And yes, immigration and movement of people is a legitimate and genuine concern for many of us, me included. But I'm afraid that in their diagnosis of the problem, we have yet to see any real answers. And when we see projected solutions from a reform, what we hear is incoherence. I mean, the net zero policies they launched back in February were reviled quite rightly as an incoherent mess, which involved, frankly, penalising and taxing anybody who was involved in renewables, which would, of course, have had a net burden upon us, the consumer. And it was very quickly that they then retreated and decided that those misguided policies were in fact an aspiration. So when they try and put their toe into the water of policy, they find that the water is far too hot. Was there a point of information? Yes.
I don't see why it matters if their policies make no sense. Labour is wandering around acting like they're about to come in and snatch their seats right from under their noses. Quality of the policy doesn't seem to prevent millions from turning out. I mean, we'll all wake up tomorrow and we might see a very, very, very startling result.
All right, well, from a sedentary position, I think we all heard what the Honourable Lady said. I'm afraid that, frankly, is an incoherent argument. You're making the case, actually, for the opposition by acknowledging the fact that, no matter how ill-conceived and badly thought out, then, it's all right to just speak irresponsibly, without care, without seriousness. And this is my fundamental problem. At a time when our world is facing the most serious challenges in my lifetime, we need serious people with serious policies in order to deal with them. We need the sort of leadership that cannot be sorted out at the end of a bar with a pint and a cigarette, however attractive that would be. We're living in the age of the centre not holding. It's Yeats, isn't it? The centre cannot hold. The worst are full of passionate intensity, the best lack all conviction. That's the era in which we're living, but we've been here before, ladies and gentlemen. We've seen these eras come and go, and it's only through clear-eyed leadership and the sort of example that, frankly, the party that I'm honoured and delighted to still be a part of after 40 years, has risen to the challenge of time and time again. We came back after the defeat in 1945. We revivified this economy after 1979. We dealt with the appalling aftermath of the great economic crisis of 2008. We delivered the Brexit that so many people voted for. I believe that it will be the Conservative Party that will rise to that challenge. However meretricious the appeal might be of Mr Farage and his friends, and it may well be that tonight they'll have a pretty good score at the end of it, but one swallow does not a summer make, and the test for reform is going to be in the detail and in the inevitable challenge they're going to have when they need to come up with policies that frankly are going to be less half-baked than the ones that we've seen thus far. I really like Marco's baking analogy. He wanted to go into the kitchen, throw everything up and create, I don't know what, a baked Greenland a la Trump perhaps? I don't know. But we have an example, don't we, of where that type of populism is going, and we see what is happening in that first 100 days in the White House. Apparently, according to the President, the best 100 days in the history of the United States. But I'd like to see the worst, if this is the best, when the economy of the United States is now tanking. He has managed single-handedly to create an Argentinian scenario with a falling dollar, a falling stock market, and yes, even falling treasury bonds in the US. Nobody else has achieved such a trifecta of disaster. All because this is a president, and this is a populist version of republicanism that frankly I do not recognise, and many other Republicans do not recognise either, that is all about breaking everything, about dividing, about not bringing people together by example, and creating enemies. Now that seems to me to be the politics of divisive destruction, incoherent anger, and a complete absence of the sort of constructive leadership that, frankly, the times demand. As I've said, Madam President, serious times require serious people. Ask yourselves this. Are Reform in any measure the serious party that we need, not just to oppose, but to govern? I think the answer is a resounding and easy no.
Very good.
Thank you. We're going to have one more round of floor speeches before we move back to our final two paper speakers. Does anyone want to give a floor speech in proposition of the motion? Yes, over there, name and college, please.
Hi there, Aidan Clare, Magdalen College. I'd like the Chamber to imagine for a moment being a 17 or an 18-year-old far away from Westminster, in Margate, in St Austell, or in Hull, or in Whitley Bay. Your entire waking memory, as many of ours in the Chamber, has been dominated by Conservative rule. You have seen your high streets go from greengrocers to Lost Mary peddlers, from butchers to iPhone repair shops. You have watched the erosion of standards in your schools, and with a rat scandal, indeed, the erosion of the schools themselves. Social clubs, pillars of communities, do not exist anymore when one can meet peers of their age. Instead, they sit in a privately rented home which their parents are being slowly squeezed out of, and they see answers to their questions as to why they perceive their lives as getting worse. They see answers from Reform, such as unfettered immigration, such as the malaise in the civil service, and the lies of Islingtonian, cheese-eating woke intelligentsia who run the country. All answers are rehearsed, PMQs at its theatre. Now, as a member of the Islingtonian woke cheese-eating intelligentsia, I can agree. We're all vacuous, sycophantic Oxbridge alumni with no knowledge of the real world, Labour and Conservative alike. I spoke briefly to Richard Tice when he came here during Michaelmas term this year. While I disagree wholeheartedly with the positions that he holds, he did come across as genuine. And all the British people want are indeed genuine leaders. I see the Conservative Party as a beast with an open wound. They are not fit for the 2020s. The most successful political party of all time who can't figure out why they bleed votes, why their facade of populism is being destroyed, and why the Reform forged blade driven into the trachea keeps twisting and twisting. Simply, if I was that 17 or 18-year-old in a town, cast by the wayside, watching my community fall apart, I would certainly consider Reform the real opposition. And the fact that British Generation Z does, the future of his nation does, as clearly seen by voting Democrats, is why I think that the Chamber could see the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone like to give a floor speech in opposition to the motion? Over there, name and college, please.
Thank you. Charlie Forgas Cooper, Jesus. I will say a lot has been made today of media attention and media critique, and a lot has been made of the fact that Reform is seemingly riding on a wave of TikToks and AI slop and, I don't know, articles. But what I will say is that the media attention 1 year into an election cycle is very different to the media attention 4 years into an election cycle. into staring down Purdah in the face. And the media attention that Reform is receiving right now, where I can look at, and frankly, I'm getting told Reform is a real opposition by two people who spent decades of their life on the Conservative payroll, which is quite hilarious. But people can ask legitimate questions of, why should we trust you? Why should we believe you? And they can have common sense quipped in their face and told to go have a pint with the leaders. These are not the policies of a serious party that can strike through. It's very easy to sit here and, I don't know, listen to the national consciousness relayed to me in the halls of the Cambridge Union by, again, Conservative backbenchers and former presidents of this House, that they have their finger on this national consciousness, that apparently in 2011 we all had greengrocers and by now they're all lost Marys, but I don't know where that comes from either. But what we're seeing is Reform sort of trading on a false image that doesn't exist. We're being told by Farage that he's got his finger on the pulse of the working class here. He's a public school boy banker. All these things, they're being fed as lies. And once this media attention changes, as this media attention will change as we go into the election cycle, look at the same that happened to Sir Keir Starmer, and quite frankly, Labour weren't ready for it in full ways. See his history as a DPP get fully judged in the public sphere. When these things change, when they turn, as we've already started to see sort of trappings of, with Reform's policies coming through half-baked and then coming back to them days later, when that gets properly started, when that machine gets started, and when the people truly have to be convinced to get off their chairs and come to the polls and vote, which overwhelmingly their numbers in the youth, in the disadvantaged communities, that Reform is seeking to win seats, not just poll votes from, they don't. If Reform can't cut through, if Reform can't make a difference, that won't happen, and this opposition will go about as quickly as Change UK did in my lifetime.
Thank you. Would anyone like to give a floor speech in abstention of the motion? Over there at the back, name and college, please.
Chang St John's College. So I'd like to start just thinking about last year when we all went to the poll and the Labour manifesto had one word on the front cover, change. You know, really capturing the imagination of the country. You know, change hopefully for the better, we thought at the time. And change is still what the British electorate is looking for. Because after, you know, about 6 months and or so of the Labour government, we have quickly realised that change is probably not the one most of us are looking for, especially not with the seemingly lack of ideas and ambition from the ministers. And, you know, the constant sense of managed decline in Britain, that seemed to be around since like the start of this century, the inability to build anything, the inability to deliver any major infrastructure project, it really puts a lot of us down. And I think that is exactly what's carrying Reform's sentiment in the poll at the moment. And it's also evidenced by the fractured political landscape. Reform only got less than 10% of the vote in the age group of 18 to 24 years old, which I'm currently in. And it's currently leveling with the Green at 15%. So they're not doing exactly well, you know, in the youth of the country, in the future of the country. You know, they have very little to offer to the young people of this country, especially in terms of policies, unlike their European equivalents, which many has various policy. Le Pen's talk about, you know, interest-free mortgage loan, whatever. And like I said, the Reform is currently buoyed by this discontent with lack of change that people want to see. And I want to argue that just like how quickly the Canadian Conservative has failed and the AFD has failed, the purpose of all of this is to say that the political landscape is so fractured and no one's really offering any actual vision that can capture the imagination of the country. And we're so far out from the next election, I don't think there is any real opposition. There's no real alternatives at the moment for people to look to, for people to flock to. The rise of Reform in media popularity is as temperamental as the Canadian Conservatives lead in the poll. And as we can see, with every change in political events, it could just vanish. And until we see a party that actually offers a vision that captures our public imagination, that makes us believe, like Labour, for, you know, a minute second, made us believe that change is possible, there is no real opposition. And that's why I'm voting abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to turn back to our paper speakers now for the final speeches of the night. Our final speaker in proposition of the motion is the Right Honourable Anne Widdecombe. The Right Honourable Anne Widdecombe was a Conservative MP for Maidstone and the Weald from 1987 to 2010. She served as a minister in John Major's government and held the posts Shadow Education and Shadow Home Secretary. In 2019, she changed political allegiance to the Brexit Party and was subsequently elected as an MEP, serving until Britain's exit from the EU. You have the ears of the House. Thank you.
Madam President, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight to answer this nonsense that's been spouted from the other side. What I can't believe is that for 55 years, I was one of them. But I saw the light, and I moved. And I moved because I wanted to join a party which spoke for the people. What does the Conservative Party speak for? It speaks for the Conservative Party. It is obsessed with how many letters it puts in to the 1922 committee every time there's a slight problem. It is utterly inward-looking. Now, my former colleague is sitting there trying hard not to look embarrassed. But he is very embarrassed, and so he darn well should be. So should they all be. Now we have this proposition that we're the real opposition. If this debate was taking place in 24 hours' time, there wouldn't actually be any debate, because the answer would be screaming at you from the election results, from the by-election, from the local elections, from the county council elections, from the mayoral elections. Those statistics would answer the question that is being raised here tonight. Now, you know, the British people, we aren't really very revolutionary. We tend to sort of doze a bit. And it's a bit like Haydn's Surprise Symphony. We sort of doze away, and suddenly there's a mighty boing! And the boing has been supplied by Reform UK. Now, 100 years ago, the Labour Party came into being. Sadly, but 100 years ago, the Labour Party came from nothing into being a party of future government. Point of information somewhere, yeah? Yeah. Carry on, wherever you are. Oh, up there!
I would disagree that the Labour Party came from nothing, as previously been stated. The Labour Party came from the trade union movement, which is a long-standing and pre-existing movement. Reform had those as basics.
Oh, yes, it did. Reform came from the Brexit movement. Didn't you actually study it? All parties are preceded by movements, that's obvious. But what I'm saying is there was no Labour Party in Parliament, and then there was a Labour Party in Parliament. So the idea that just because we are numerically lacking at the moment in parliamentary terms, that we cannot possibly form an opposition or a government is just a nonsense, because every 100 years or so, Britain does wake up. And it is showing every sign of waking up at the moment. No, I've already had one, and it wasn't very informative. The British people are actually waking up to the fact that they live in a country which does not work. Whether it is that you cannot drive a car for the potholes, whether it is that you can't get an appointment with your GP for 3 weeks, whatever it may be, whether it is that your child at school is being taught that there are 72 different genders when they're only ever going to meet 2, whatever it may be, Britain is waking up to the fact that things are not working as they ought to be. Is it information? Oh, you're up there too. Why are they all up there tonight?
I think the issue that you're going to find, though, is that, yes, perhaps gender issues is something you can focus on now, anti-immigration is something you can focus on now, but the real issues that are facing people are people aren't able to buy a house, people aren't able to start families, people aren't able to, see a career for themselves going forward. So when all this anti-immigration stuff doesn't work, what are you going to do then? Because we'll have binned off the Conservatives, we'll have binned off Labour, and then we're going to have binned off you. Are we even going to still have the same government and constitutional structure that we have now?
Right, you've talked about a whole raft of problems which actually stem from too much uncontrolled immigration. And we are not afraid to say it. That is the difference between us and the Conservative Party over there. Good heavens. I mean, Mr. Buckland, he really believes that we have no policies. I mean, we have suggested coming out of ECHR, we have suggested tax incentives for medical staff to stay in the health service, we have suggested refusing asylum at source to anybody who comes from a safe country, we have suggested, for a start, absolutely putting the brakes on net zero, all of which are now being picked up by the other parties. And yet we led on that. Not the Conservatives. Goodness knows what the Conservatives think. I don't know what you think. I don't think you know what you think. And certainly the public doesn't know what you think. Blank page. That's because I know what I'm talking about without having to write it down.
You used to.
So, what I'm saying, on a more serious note, is that reform is actually addressing the issues which people feel increasingly strongly about. And I wish I had a penny for every time, I wish I had a penny for every time during these last local elections I have been told by people with affiliations to other parties, but who are now coming to reform. I have been told by them, you're the only ones that speak common sense. And there is an enormous desire, not for theory, not for posture, but for common sense solutions to problems. Well, there's information coming at me from all sides at the moment. So, sorry, you have a favourite?
Yeah.
Who's your favourite?
He stood up first.
Oh, right, he stood up first. Yes, carry on.
Thank you. You were saying that the Reform Party is addressing the issues that matter. I have waited in vain for a single word about what you would do about the state of the British economy. From your side, but from the other side as well, actually.
Oh, well, I was going to say, what are they going to do?
It's worth billions to this country and to all the people trying to produce and sell things. It's a customs union with the European Union. Join the single market. There is only one party actually saying this. I put it to you, the real opposition is the Liberal Democrats.
In every serious debate, there is always at least one comic turn. And the idea that the Liberal Democrats are the party of opposition, what does Ed Davey do? Does he talk seriously about the economy? No, he goes up and down water slides. He indulges in the sort of antics that most people indulge in when they're 5 years old. That is no sort of opposition. Real opposition consists of identifying what the problems are and proposing solutions. It is not about who has the most seats in Parliament. If the party that does have the most opposition seats in Parliament is not actually doing its job. And I have to say, I have yet to hear Kemi Badenoch come up with one original idea. And I will willingly, at this point, give way if either of those two gentlemen there want to produce one original idea that Kemi Badenoch has come up with. Their silence says it all. And that silence actually is shameful. Because what it means is that the party that is supposed to be supplying the opposition actually isn't. And the party that is supplying the opposition is the one that has only a handful of MPs, but is about to have a very large number of councillors and is probably also about to have another MP. And I don't think people should simply say, media attention, please conclude. You know, when I was secretary of the Oxford Union, I wasn't allowed to do that. I was only allowed to do it if an undergraduate was being verbose. Not if a speaker was being verbose. But I will conclude. I will conclude. And I will conclude with a prediction. First of all, we're going to hear an awful lot of nonsense from the next speaker. But the other prediction that I will conclude with is this. We'll get the answer to who is the real opposition when the votes have been counted tomorrow. We have set up, Reform has set up 400 branches from nothing. We have topped every single poll, either in the clear lead or a joint lead or a very small lead, but always in the lead. And where are they? Where is this boastful lot? Where are they? They are nowhere. They are third. They are fourth. They are desperately behind. They are useless. We are the opposition. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Our final speaker of the night in opposition of the motion is the Right Honourable Sir Andrew Mitchell. The Right Honourable Sir Andrew Mitchell has been the Conservative MP for Sutton Coldfield since 2001 and previously served as MP for Gedling from 1987 to 97. He served as the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Deputy Foreign Secretary, and Minister of State for International Development and Africa. He was President of the Cambridge Union in Lent 1978. Sir Andrew, you have the ears of the House. Thank you.
Well, Madam President, it is wonderful to be back. 47 years after I sat in that chair which you are gracing tonight, and a chance to congratulate you on what is going to be a fabulous term as President. I've seen your remarkable programme, and it's clearly a sign that the Cambridge Union is on the up. And it's also very nice to see my old friend and music hall turn, Anne, here tonight. We entered the Commons on the same day together in 1987, and though you might not believe it, we do actually agree on quite a lot. Of course, and here, Madam President, I seek to ingratiate myself with the audience. Of course, while I had the great privilege of being educated here at Cambridge, the greatest university in the world, she sadly languished at an altogether inferior institution to be found in the Latin Quarter of Cowley called Oxford. Now, I hope, of course.
Whereas Oxford is number 1 in world rankings, the other university is number 5.
Any objective person, Madam President, and this hall tonight, this great union is filled with objective persons, would know that that was completely untrue. Now, I hope, Madam President, the one thing we can all agree about tonight is that we do need a very serious opposition to this dreadful government, which has rightly identified growth as the most important thing for developing everything in Britain, and which has systematically done things to kill the economy and kill off growth. And what a contrast, Madam President, to 1997, when I lost my seat, and when there was a charismatic leader and a government that at least had a strategy. This government has no strategy at all. And above all, there are three reasons tonight why this motion, in my view, should be rejected. The first is, and it's a point that was made with great eloquence over there, reform occupies a very narrow part of the political landscape. Indeed, arguably, they are not the main opposition to the Tories. The Reform won 6 seats at the general election. The Liberal Democrats won 60. So if you are a Tory strategist, you need to focus on that. And the reason why the Conservative Party has been so successful at winning elections over the last 100 years is it is a broad church. There are a huge number of one-nation Tories who care about international affairs, who care about development. They may even read The Guardian. And they know that my party represents a broad and tolerant and free market tradition. And that is what we have to return to, of course.
Opposition today. Those good One Nation Tory MPs are sitting in front of me, having lost their seats. The party currently leading this is to the further right. The second closest was even further right than Badenoch in Gemrick. One Nation no longer holds the ears of the Conservative Party.
But the honourable lady makes my point for me, that the reason why the Tories win, and the reason why they won't win if they don't adhere to this, is that we are a broad church which serves a very broad part of the British public. Now, the second of the three reasons I want to focus on is this, that reform, they amplify problems and grievances. They do not resolve or solve them. Indeed, their populism depends upon not solving them. And reform's populism is bolstered by opportunism. Last week, Nigel Farage said he does not have a solution to illegal migration. He said, and I quote, "Deportation is politically impossible." Solutions, some reformistas suggest, are simplistic, unworkable, illegal, and impossible to implement. And where reform peddles wider solutions to problems, they are nakedly opportunistic and unprincipled. So, in the South, Madam President, Nigel Farage urges insurance-based health services as the best way of developing our health structures. But in the Red Wall seats, he makes it clear that the NHS should not be replaced. In Tory seats, he is a cheerleader for privatisation. In Scunthorpe, he's apparently had a Damascene conversion in favour of nationalisation. And the public may be angry with centrist politicians, but they are not stupid. And reform inveighs against high tax, and it's true that our tax levels are incredibly high. We spent $400 billion on protecting families and jobs during COVID. I make no apology for that. But in Britain, we have to come to a conclusion on a central debate on this matter, which is that in Britain we want American levels of taxation, low, but we want European levels of social provision. And you cannot do that. You've got to make very difficult policy decisions. We are going to see in this country in the next few years a very significant increase in expenditure on defence, and there will have to be cuts in welfare, and as a society we will have to accept that. But that is why, Madam President, the Tories will show themselves to be the real opposition, because we will focus on policy renewal so those who deserted us feel able to return. We will not focus on mergers and deals with a party that has said it's intent on destroying us. That is how the main opposition will, in time, again become the government. Serious policy solutions, as Sir Robert so eloquently said, to the modern problems of today are what will return the Tory party to government. And thirdly and finally, in that is this. Reform have a vision, but it is a Trumpian vision. For years, Nigel has associated himself directly and totally with Donald Trump. 100 visits to the US and to Trump. He has given himself 100% to a president whose policies are having a dreadful effect on our world and our country, tearing up 80 years of alliances and an international system which America itself was responsible for founding. Of course, Europe must do more. But it was a very low moment when at the United Nations, America voted with Russia and North Korea against all its allies and friends of many, many years' duration. And we are returning now to a very dangerous world, which redolent of pre-1914. Of great powers with areas of influence, so that Trump can talk about taking over Greenland, trying to take over Canada. What impact do you think that has on the Chinese plans for Taiwan? And the Reform Party, the leaders of the Reform Party, have been strong supporters of Putin. Look what Nigel Farage has said. You have no need, Madam President, to look in the crystal ball. You can read the book. Well, reforms and Trump's views aren't mine. They're not the views of the people of Canada. And this week, we saw what happened there. And the truth is, in my view, in this country, we are much more like Canada than we are the United States. And Carney's victory over the Trumpian right in Canada is powerful evidence of why reform, too, will fail here. Now, in 1997, the last time the Tories were flat on their backs, there was a lot of similar complacency and eloquent words like we heard from Anne tonight. And it was Tony Blair who said at a party conference at about this stage in the electoral cycle, "Don't think these Tories have gone away. They are only sleeping. They will be back." And just as then, we have a lot of work to do as we build a policy platform that will enable us once again to serve our fellow citizens in government. But there's a reason why the Tories have been the most successful democratic political party in the developed world, believing in freedom before the law, free enterprise, individual liberty, the proper provision for those who rightly should have it, and above all, being a broad church. We, Madam President, in the Conservative Party are the real opposition. We will renew and we will regenerate and we will, Madam President, be back. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you for everyone tonight for a fantastic debate. Just a couple of notices before we go ahead and vote. Firstly, our floor speech prize for the night is going to go to our first floor speech from Abstention over in the back. So please come find one of us at the end so we can organise your floor speech prize for you for that. In terms of upcoming events, on Monday, we have George Robinson, who's a star from Sex Education, coming to speak, so please come for that. On Tuesday, we have Baron Layard speaking, who's a world-leading expert in economics, so he'll also be really interesting. And on Wednesday, we have Katie Price, Love Island star and reality TV and influencer, who'll be really, really good to listen to. And next Thursday, we have our next debate, which is no longer part of Open Period, which is going to be on the monarchy and to be really fascinating as well. We also are still selling our Easter Garden Party tickets, which is going to be happening on the 21st of June and has a Mediterranean theme. We'd love to see lots of you there. In this house, we vote with our feet. We have 3 doors at the back: eyes, nose, and abstention through the middle. Please go vote, and I hope to see you in the orator afterwards. Thank you. She's not Love Island, is she?